Okay, so get this. We're diving into some seriously spooky Cold War stuff today. Mind control research.
Yeah.
You sent over parts of the Minds of Men documentary, and honestly, it's got me a little freaked out already. We're talking CIA programs, secret experiments, the whole 9 yards.
It's a bit like a Cold War spy thriller meets a science fiction novel.
Totally. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, the documentary focuses on a CIA program called MKULTRA,
MKULTRA.
which ran for over a decade, starting in the early 50s.
Wow.
The U.S. government was convinced that the Soviets had mastered mind control techniques, and they wanted to catch up.
Oh, they thought the Soviets were controlling people's minds, like full-on Manchurian candidate stuff.
That was the fear. Ironically, MKULTRA was launched just weeks after Stalin died.
Oh, wow.
Talk about missing the memo.
So what were they doing in this MKULTRA program? Was it all about LSD, like everyone says?
It was a lot more than just LSD. We're talking hypnosis, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, you name it. They probably tried it.
Oh, my gosh.
And it wasn't just limited to a few labs either.
Right.
These experiments were happening all over North America, even overseas.
You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
How many people were involved in this?
Tens of thousands.
Wow.
And many of them had no idea they were even part of an experiment.
Oh, gosh.
The documentary talks about this Dr. Ewen Cameron, who is doing some really disturbing stuff at the Allen Memorial Institute in Canada.
Right.
He had this theory called psychic driving, where he'd bombard patients with recorded messages,
Oh, my God.
like hundreds of thousands of times, trying to essentially reprogram their brains.
That sounds terrifying. Were they just making this up as they went along, or was there any actual science behind it?
This is where it gets interesting. They were drawing inspiration from a brand new field at the time called cybernetics.
Cybernetics. That sounds intense.
Cybernetics sounds complicated, but it's basically about control systems,
Okay.
like the thermostat in your house.
Right.
These scientists thought the human brain could be controlled in the same way with inputs and outputs that could be manipulated.
So they were trying to hack the human brain like a computer.
In a way, yes. One of the key figures in cybernetics was Norbert Wiener.
Okay.
He was this brilliant mathematician who believed you could apply the principles of engineering to living organisms.
I see.
The CIA saw this and thought, hey, maybe we can use this to control people's minds.
That's a pretty big leap.
Yeah.
Did they even have any success with this?
Well, that's where things get even more ethically questionable.
Oh, no.
They started doing experiments on animals, and then eventually they moved on to humans.
Oh, gosh.
One of the most controversial figures in this whole story is Dr. Jose Delgado.
Okay.
He became famous for stopping a charging bull in its tracks using a remote-controlled device implanted in the animal's brain.
Wait, seriously? He could control a bull with a remote control. That sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
He even developed a device called a stimoceiver that could trigger a wide range of emotions and behaviors in both monkeys and humans.
Wow.
It's pretty mind-blowing stuff, but also incredibly disturbing when you think about the potential for abuse.
So they were actually implanting devices in people's brains. This is getting creepy.
It gets worse. There was this project called the Boston Violence Project, led by these doctors, Vernon, Mark Frank Irvin, and William Sweet.
Okay.
They were convinced that violence was caused by brain abnormalities and that they could surgically treat it.
Surgically treat violence. What does that even mean?
They were literally destroying parts of the brain in an attempt to control aggressive behavior.
No way.
They often targeted vulnerable populations like prisoners and people with mental illness.
Oh my gosh.
One of the most heartbreaking stories from that project is the case of Leonard Kyle, who they called Thomas R. in their book.
What happened to him?
His life was basically ruined by their intervention.
Oh.
He went from being a functional member of society to a chronically hospitalized mental patient, and sadly, his story isn't unique.
This is so messed up. It's like something out of a dystopian novel. But who was funding all of this research? Was it all coming from the CIA?
You might be surprised to learn who was funding this research. It wasn't just shady government agencies.
I see.
Some of the biggest philanthropic organizations in the country were involved, like the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundations.
Hold on. These are the same organizations that fund hospitals and libraries. What were they thinking?
It's a complicated question, and one that raises some serious concerns about the influence of these organizations and the lack of transparency surrounding their funding decisions.
And all of this was happening right under everyone's noses.
A lot of it remained classified for decades.
Wow.
It wasn't until the 1970s when the MKULTRA program was exposed that the public started to get a glimpse of what had been going on.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. And to think this was all happening in Canada too, right?
Absolutely. The Canadian connection to MKULTRA is a story in itself. In fact, one of the key figures in the development of sensory deprivation techniques was a Canadian psychologist named Donald Hebb.
Wait, sensory deprivation,
Mhm.
like those isolation tanks you sometimes see in spas.
Exactly. But Hebb's experiments were a lot more intense. He was placing volunteers in chambers that completely blocked out all sensory input. Sight, sound, touch, everything.
Gosh.
And what he found was that people started to lose it pretty quickly.
You know how you get a little weird when you've been alone for too long? Imagine being completely cut off from all senses.
Yeah.
Hebb found that it could actually drive people temporarily insane, something the CIA was very interested in.
Right.
This is insane. So they were using Canada as a testing ground for these mind control experiments.
In a way, yes. Hebb's work at McGill University was funded by the CIA, and his findings were later incorporated into their QBARC manual, which was essentially a guide to interrogation and brainwashing techniques.
So Hebb's work gave them the tools to break down the mind, but how did they plan to rebuild it?
That's where the cybernetics research comes back into play. Hebb's work got the CIA thinking about how to break down and rebuild the mind. This led them to a new field of study called cybernetics. They were fascinated by the idea that you could essentially program a human being like a machine, using feedback loops to control their thoughts and behaviors.
So it wasn't just about breaking people down.
Yeah.
It was about rebuilding them into something else, something more controllable.
Exactly.
This is some serious Black Mirror stuff we're talking about.
It is. And they weren't just theorizing about this, they were actually trying to put it into practice. These Macy conferences, these big interdisciplinary meetings they were holding.
Okay.
They brought together some of the brightest minds in the country, mathematicians, psychologists, anthropologists, even computer scientists.
Really?
They were all trying to figure out how to crack the code of the human brain.
So they really thought they could control people's minds, like computers. Didn't anyone think this was, a little unethical?
Well, some did. Even Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics,
Hey.
started to get cold feet when he saw how his ideas were being used.
I see.
He became a vocal critic of the militarization of science, arguing that these technologies could be used for great harm. But others, like Jose Delgado, were full steam ahead.
Oh.
He was convinced that his work could lead to a psycho-civilized society where violence and aggression would be eliminated through technological intervention.
I can see how that might sound appealing on the surface, but the idea of controlling people's minds even for their own good is pretty terrifying.
Exactly. And Delgado's methods were, let's just say, a little extreme.
Oh, no.
He was implanting electrodes in people's brains and using them to trigger all sorts of emotions and behaviors.
Really?
He could make someone laugh, cry, even become sexually aroused, all with the flick of a switch.
That is just wild. Did anyone try to stop him?
There was a lot of controversy surrounding his work, but he always defended it, arguing that it was for the benefit of humanity.
Wow.
But you can see how easily this kind of technology could be abused, right?
Absolutely. It's like giving someone the keys to the human soul and hoping they don't use them for evil.
That's a great analogy. And sadly, we've seen this play out time and time again throughout history. The same technologies that can heal can also harm, and it all comes down to who's wielding them and for what purpose.
This whole MKULTRA program and these cybernetics experiments, it's clear that they went way too far. But what about the people who are running these experiments? Did they ever face any consequences for what they did?
Unfortunately, not really. A lot of the records were destroyed, and many of the key players died before they could be held accountable. But their legacy lives on, and not just in the form of conspiracy theories and science fiction movies.
What do you mean?
This quest to control the mind didn't end with the Cold War. It's still going on today in different forms, often hidden behind a veil of scientific progress and good intentions.
So this wasn't just a historical blip.
Definitely not. In fact, the technologies for manipulating the brain are becoming increasingly sophisticated and accessible.
Okay.
We're talking about things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, and neurofeedback techniques that can influence brain activity from outside the skull.
Wow.
These technologies have the potential to treat a wide range of conditions, from depression to Parkinson's disease, but they also raise serious ethical concerns.
Wait, so we can actually control people's minds without even having to cut them open anymore? This is starting to feel like a slippery slope.
It is. And it's happening faster than you might think. Companies are already developing consumer-grade neurotechnology devices that promise to enhance cognitive function, reduce stress, and even improve sleep.
Wow.
But who's regulating these devices? And what are the long-term consequences of messing with our brainwaves? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves now before it's too late.
When you think about it, the line between therapy and manipulation is pretty thin. What starts as a treatment for a medical condition could easily morph into something more sinister. something that could be used to control our thoughts and behaviors.
That's a valid concern. And it's not just about individual control either. Imagine the implications for marketing, for advertising, for propaganda.
Right.
If you can influence people's emotions and decision-making processes at a neurological level, the possibilities for abuse are endless.
This is seriously disturbing stuff. It makes you wonder, are we heading towards some kind of dystopian future where our minds are constantly being manipulated by technology?
It's certainly a possibility, but the good news is we're not powerless in this equation. We can educate ourselves about these technologies, we can demand transparency from the companies and institutions that are developing them, and we can push for ethical guidelines to ensure that they're used responsibly.
So what you're saying is we need to be more aware, more critical, more engaged in the conversation about how these technologies are being used. We can't just sit back and let the future happen to us. We need to be active participants in shaping it.
Exactly. This isn't just about science and technology, it's about the future of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of world do we want to live in? One where our minds are free and independent, or one where we're constantly being nudged and manipulated by unseen forces?
It's a choice we all have to make. And it starts with being informed and having these conversations, even if they're a little uncomfortable sometimes. This deep dive into MKULTRA and the whole world of mind control research, it's been a real eye-opener for me. And I think it's important to remember that this history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's something that's still happening today in different forms, and it's something we all need to be aware of.
I couldn't agree more. This is about more than just understanding the past. It's about shaping the future. And the future of our minds depends on us, on our willingness to question, to challenge, and to demand a world where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
It really makes you think about all the ways we're already being influenced by technology, even without realizing it. Like, how much time do we spend scrolling through social media, getting bombarded with targeted ads and carefully curated content?
That's a great point. We're already living in a world where our attention is being constantly manipulated, and it's only going to get more sophisticated as these neurotechnologies advance.
So what can we do about it? Should we all just ditch our smartphones and go live in a cabin in the woods?
Well, that's one option, but it's not exactly practical for most people. I think the key is awareness. The more we understand about how these technologies work and the potential risks involved, the better equipped we'll be to make informed choices about how we use them.
So knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. We need to be critical consumers of technology, asking questions about who's behind it, what their motives are, and what the potential downsides might be. It's like anything else. You wouldn't just take a pill without knowing what it is or what the side effects might be, right?
Right. But with technology, it's not always that clear cut. It can be hard to know what's going on behind the scenes, especially with these algorithms and artificial intelligence systems.
That's true. But there are resources out there that can help us understand this stuff better. There are journalists, researchers, and activists who are doing amazing work to expose the potential dangers of unchecked technological development. We just need to seek out that information and be willing to engage with it.
So what are some practical things we can do to protect ourselves? Besides, moving off the grid.
Well, for starters, we can be more mindful of our technology use. Limit your screen time, be selective about the apps you use, and don't just blindly accept every notification or update.
So basically, be more intentional about how we interact with technology.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to question the status quo. If something feels wrong or manipulative, speak up. Demand transparency from the companies that are collecting your data and influencing your thoughts and behaviors.
I like that. Don't be afraid to push back. It's easy to feel like we're just cogs in the machine, but we do have power as consumers and citizens. We can choose to support companies that align with our values and boycott those that don't.
Absolutely. And we can also support organizations that are fighting for ethical guidelines and regulations for these neurotechnologies. We need to make sure that these powerful tools are used responsibly and for the benefit of humanity, not just for profit or control.
It all comes back to that choice, doesn't it? The choice between a future where technology enhances our lives and one where it controls us.
Exactly. It's a choice we're making every day with every click, every swipe, every purchase. But by being aware, informed, and engaged, we can make sure that we're making those choices consciously and deliberately, shaping a future that aligns with our values and aspirations.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. It's been fascinating, disturbing, and ultimately empowering. We've uncovered some dark secrets about the past and explored some potentially unsettling possibilities for the future. But most importantly, we've learned that we're not powerless in the face of these technological advancements. We have a choice, and we have a voice. And by using that voice, we can help shape a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said. The future is in our hands, and it's up to us to decide what kind of world we want to create.